Hello, everybody. Welcome. I am Dr. Steve Johnson, and this live YouTube live event is part of a graduate course in short-term counseling, a class that focuses almost exclusively on REBT. And so, and I do open this to other people too. So if you have questions, just use the chat feature and I will take your questions first. However, I did make it possible, and I stated it in the announcement for this, that I would take questions that had been emailed in, and I did receive 10 or 11 questions that if I don't get somebody that asks some kind of a chat question, then I can go to the list that I have. So anytime you have a question or a comment, feel free to use the chat feature, and I will be happy to read it and then respond to it too. Okay. This week's lecture was on the ABC model in REBT. So all the questions that were emailed to me were specifically about that model. So I will address them. And I see that at this point, nobody has submitted via chat a question. So let me begin with some that have been emailed to me. The first one was, don't external events also contribute to our emotions and behaviors, or do only beliefs serve as the cause? This is a good question. I did cover that in the lecture, but let me jump into that a bit more pointedly. Yes, external events are relevant to our emotions and behaviors, but not the events themselves. It's not like there's something magical that happens between the event and the brain, such that the brain creates a particular emotion or behavior. What happens is, when through our senses we experience an external event, we begin to have inferences about that event. In other words, we try to give meaning to the event. And that meaning that we give to that event, we call an inference. And then based on the content of that inference, we begin to make some evaluations about whether the event is good or bad or helpful or not helpful or whatever. And so clearly the external event, if the external event was not there, then we probably wouldn't have the inferences and beliefs. But that's not totally true, because the event might be one that's not going on in the present, but maybe one that happened in the past, and I'm currently remembering that event. So remembering that event could trigger any inferences or beliefs that I have, or the event is something that I'm anticipating in the future. So the event hasn't even happened yet. I'm just anticipating that. So it could be some past event, but it's only an activating event if I'm actually thinking about it. If I'm not thinking about it, it is not relevant at that point. So yes, external events, either if remembered or anticipated, do contribute to the emotions and behaviors, but they don't directly do so, as does the beliefs, and to a lesser extent, the inferences. So really good question. Again, if you got in a little bit later, I'm just saying that if you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to just chat in the question or the comment, and I will read it and respond to it. Otherwise, I have a number of questions that were emailed to me throughout the week, and so I'm going through them sequentially. The second question that came up was, since the activating or the critical activating event can be a past event, aren't you saying that past events do serve as the cause of our emotions? Well, yes, and I just explained that in the previous questions. These are kind of related questions. Yes, the activating event, if it's being remembered, is, as in a past event, is relevant to our emotions. I wouldn't say that they're a direct cause, because if I have, if I don't have any beliefs about it, then I'm not going to have any emotion about it, etc. So, yeah, of course, any event, external from the past, current, or anticipated, is relevant to our emotions and behaviors. They just do not serve as the direct cause, as do the beliefs. The third question: in an REBT session, do you begin the session by having the client identify the activating event? Not necessarily. Typically, when clients come in, at the beginning of the session, they may start by talking about event. They may go, Dr. Johnson, you won't believe what happened to me this week. And so what follows might be the event. Or, oh, Dr. Johnson, I'm going to have an exam this week and I'm upset about it. So they start talking about the event. On the other hand, if the client comes in and rather than talking about the situation, they probably will talk about some emotion that they're experiencing. Maybe they're experiencing a considerable amount of anxiety, or they're depressed, or they feel hurt or guilty or whatever. Then they may open with the guilt. So typically in the structure of a session, and I will have a whole lecture in this course on the typical structure of an REBT session and what we do with that. Typically, it begins with the client either talking about an activating event, a situation, or it begins with them talking about some emotion that's causing them some trouble, or even maybe a behavior that is causing trouble. So we could get first get the A, and then we get the C, or we get the C, the emotion or behavior, and then we get the situation. But the very next step would be then to create a goal and to look at any dysfunctional beliefs that gave rise to the dysfunctional emotions or behaviors. Again, if you have a question, just submit it to me and I will be happy to consider it. The fourth question is, the individual said, I understand that there are both positive emotions and negative emotions. What's the difference? Again, this is a good question and one that gets confused, but it's quite simple. A positive emotion is the one that we as humans generally like to experience. It doesn't mean that they bring about good consequences. Not at all. A positive emotion is one that we like to feel, like happiness or joy or contentment, right? Or calmness or whatever. So those would be positive emotions. Negative emotions are those emotions that we don't like to experience. Rage or depression or deep anxiety or feeling hurt or jealous or those kinds of emotions we don't really like. Now, so we sort emotions into positive emotions and negative emotions. But then for both the positive emotions and the negative emotions, there is another division. So for a positive emotion could either be helpful or unhelpful, and a negative emotion could be either helpful or unhelpful. And what do we mean in that situation? An emotion, whether it's positive or negative, is helpful if that emotion helps the client attain their desired life goals, whatever they are, and in whatever domain, whether they're personal goals, their professional goals, occupational goals, interpersonal goals, goals they have vis-a-vis another person, or educational goals or spiritual goals, whatever their goals are. So a helpful emotion, whether positive or negative, helps us in attaining those desired life goals, and an unhelpful positive or negative emotion is one that tends to sabotage or inhibit or impede us in attaining those goals. I hope you found that that helpful. Um, and then the very next question we've already answered. It was with positive and negative emotions. Um, we distinguish between helpful and unhelpful emotions. How do we do that? It's very easy. The one and only way that we determine whether an emotion is helpful or unhelpful, whether it's positive or negative, is not based upon the situation. If the situation is very negative, it doesn't mean that we should have a negative emotion or a positive emotion. Uh, the situation is irrelevant to determining whether the emotion is helpful or not helpful. What is relevant to determining whether the emotion is helpful or not helpful is it helping the client move toward their desired goal? If it helps, then it's helpful. If it doesn't help, it's unhelpful. Okay? So it's not it's not the activating event that determines whether the emotion is helpful or unhelpful. It is the goal of the client and the attainment of that goal. That is a very, very important and fundamental issue within REBT, and one that if you don't quite grasp, feel free to ask questions about that, get a hold of me, and I'm more than happy to explain it, because it will come up over and over again. Question number 6 was, do we individuals always have goals? Well, I think I know why they're asking that, because in the lecture, in the recorded lecture, what I do say is that REBT's conceptualization or theory of humans is that we are goal-directed creatures. And this one is saying, do we always, as individuals, have goals? Well, this is actually a really philosophical question. For example, if I'm just relaxing or I'm just vegging out and just thinking about something positive or whatever, do I have a goal at that point? Well, I think one of the things we have to ask and to address is there's a difference between having a goal and being aware of that goal. And so generally we may have goals, but in the moment we may not be aware of the goal. Maybe me just vegging out and relaxing, maybe that's my goal. Or if I'm not even aware that that's a goal, it might be my goal is I don't want to be working. So my goal is not to be working. So relaxing and vegging out is actually the attainment of my goal, even if I'm not thinking about it. So that's an important thing. Sometimes when we talk to the client and ask them what their goals are, they may not know, but with a little thought, they can raise it up to the level of awareness and begin to talk about that. Okay, I hope that is. Hope you find that is as helpful. Question number 7 is: might it be helpful for a client to know whether their emotion is normal or abnormal? I like this question because, as I stated in now 2 lectures, in REBT, we don't focus on whether an emotion is normal or abnormal, because very negative, unhelpful emotions could be quite normal. It is normal for people to get depressed. It's normal for people to be anxious about some big event that's coming up. The question, but that doesn't help solve the issue if the client's having really dysfunctional emotions around that. A better way to focus, a better thing to focus on is whether the emotion is helpful or unhelpful, rather than is it normal or abnormal. I mean, we do all kinds of things that are really that sabotage us in reaching our goals, but statistically, that's normal. A lot of humans do that. A lot of humans do all kinds of things that are not helpful, right? I do all kinds of things sometimes that are not real, helpful, but it's perfectly normal for me to do those. And so I think in therapy, what we want to do is not focus so much on whether it's normal or not, not normal. But the person goes on to ask something that I think is really, really interesting. Perhaps might that helping a client see whether it's normal or abnormal, might that not help satisfy their curiosity? Or if they're putting themselves down, might that help? Well, yeah, that is possible that could happen, that the client just wants to know whether they're normal or abnormal. But knowing that they're normal or abnormal might actually get in the way of them taking steps to change. Maybe they're normal, but the emotion and behavior that they're engaging in or they experience is not helping them. And so telling them, yeah, well, that's normal, may not be all that we would be saying to them. I often will say to a client, yes, your emotion may be fully normal, but right now it is clearly unhelpful. You've told me the ways in which it is unhelpful. And so let's work on experiencing an emotion that might be more helpful, also normal, rather than the normal emotion you're having right now, which is relatively unhelpful, as you have just convinced me that it is unhelpful. And how do I know whether that emotion is helpful or not helpful? Because if I look with the client's help at what their goals are and why those are their goals, what values do they want to reach? Why are they acting on? Why is that their goal? So, for example, if their goal is they want to increase justice in the world, then I want to know whether the emotion that they're experiencing is helping them to do that, or is it getting in the way? If they're highly, highly angry, right, and demanding, and they're alienating people, then it's not going to help them to attain justice in the world. But if they have a negative emotion, right, like righteous indignation, helpful, they don't engage in self-sabotaging behaviors, and they can collaborate and cooperate with people to try to bring about justice, then that might be more helpful. Both would be normal. One's helpful, one's not helpful. I hope that helps you sort through those very important distinctions. And so I really like that. Really like that question. It gets to a major point. Question number 8. Couldn't it cause problems if we tell a client that their belief that a situation is awful, is unhelpful, or irrational? Couldn't that come across as a negative judgment? Absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great, great point. And so one of the things that we do, particularly if an individual has gone through a very negative, very, very huge or very negative experience, like the death of a loved one, or maybe they just found out that they have an incurable disease and they're believing that it's awful. And we tell them that that situation is not awful, because in REBT, awfulizing is seen as an unhelpful, irrational belief. That's not a great strategy. That would be utterly inappropriate. If someone just got a really bad diagnosis, or a loved one died, or they failed at something that was really important to them to attain some goal that they wanted, they will be awfulizing for a while. What we want to do is help them realize that awfulizing might be normal, but then also look at how much time they may be spending awfulizing about it, and whether spending a lot of time is helping them to adjust to this negative situation and begin to move on in some more helpful way. But we don't go challenge the belief that it's awful, and tell them, no, it's not awful, it's highly inconvenient. If we say something like that I frankly, I think that's cruel. And if a client walked out on me because I said something like that, I would fully understand. We need to have empathy. Empathy is tremendously important. In a group of studies called Common Factors Research, one of the things that predicts a good outcome in therapy is if the client experiences the therapist as having empathy for them. And here's a real interesting thing. Neurologically, when the client experiences that I'm having empathy for them, and I really do have empathy for them, the same part of their brain and my brain are activated. In some way, we are connected almost neurologically, not in a spooky kind of way, that we just have one mind or one brain. No, it's not like that. It's just that certain parts of our brain are activated. And because of that, empathy, then the client feels a connection with this, they're more likely to really hang in there with the therapy. So you want to have empathy. Of course, you want to challenge negative, unhelpful beliefs, but initially, if a person experiences a major loss or really negative situation, don't go disputing that situation is awful. That comes across as a total lack of empathy. Not a great strategy, and we'll talk about that later in the term. Again, if you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to just send me a chat, and I will do my best to try to answer that. I have a few more questions, about 3 more questions that people email to me. And then if nobody has something, then we may just call it a night. The question number 9 was, can you restate the difference among the types of shoulds? Oh, I love this. Because some people, and although I stated we try to have an ideal vocabulary within REBT, and one kind of dysfunctional emotion is demandingness. And I did say that in English, some of the words that may indicate, not invariably indicate, but may indicate demandingness are words like should, ought, must, have to, and need, right? Now, when the client uses those words, don't jump on it and think that they are necessarily being demanding. Because sometimes in English, we just use words, but we don't mean them in some clinical way. We're not walking around, talking REBTers, right? And so sometimes that's just the way we make sense out of it. Like if I'm in New York and I'm trying to catch the subway, it's late. When I get there, it's jam-packed, and when I get somewhere, I go, that was awful. Do I mean that it was the worst thing that has ever happened in Western civilization? No, it's just the way that we talk, okay? So don't jump on the word. But the word should or must can have different functions. And only one of those is seen as dysfunctional within REBT. The dysfunctional one is when we're making absolute demands. You must be the way I want you to be. I have to be perfect. The world must be fair. That's an absolute demand. We're not putting any conditions there. We're just saying that has to be that. It's like we see ourselves almost like God, and we're making this demand that the self, others, life, and world must be a particular way. That one will cause some dysfunctional emotions and behaviors typically. However, there are other kinds of what look like demands that we would say don't actually function as demands within REBT, and they don't necessarily cause any emotional disturbance. Those are ethical demands or moral demands, legal demands, or pragmatic demands. Let me give an example. If like in the 10 Commandments, in Old Testament or Torah, say thou shalt not kill, that's demand. And so, but it's a conditional demand. If you want to be moral, then you must not kill, right? But some people don't care whether they're moral. And if they don't care, there's no absolute demand on them. They experience no demand whatsoever. But morality and ethicality, and sometimes even religiosity, is based on if you want to be moral, if you want to be ethical, or if you want to be a faithful Jew, Christian, Muslim, whatever your religion is, then you might want to refrain from killing people, okay, unjustly. That is not problematical. The other one, legal, we can put it in the form of an if then, which is a conditional. If you want to be within the law, then you probably ought to drive 25 miles an hour in a 25-mile-an-hour zone. That's a legal demand. No problem with that. But unless a person says, you absolutely have to follow the law. No, you don't. You don't have to. You can pay the consequences if you don't. So there's no absolute demand that a person has to follow the law. But if you want to be within the law, then you must do this. And then the same thing very pragmatically. If you want to get an A in a short-term counseling class with Dr. Johnson, then you probably ought to do the reading, do the assignments, etc. Okay? It's not an absolute demand. You don't have to do those things if you don't want to. But if you want to pass or get a good grade, then you should do those things. You see? So just because a person uses the word should doesn't mean that they're making a demand. If it's ethical or moral, if it's legal or pragmatic, no problem. That is why we say in REBT, we're not against whatever your moral position is or ethical position. We will accept that. We're just looking at the global absolute demands that you're making, not your moral, not your legal, and not your pragmatic ones. Okay. So absolute demands are a problem. Conditional demands, no problem. Okay. The next question is, can you explain what you mean by a full rational belief and why is that important? Okay. We will cover much more later in the term. But for right now, let's just take someone has an irrational belief. And there's the core demand and then another derivative with it. Let's say, I must be perfect, and if I'm not, then I'm an utter failure. Okay? That's a demand, and then global negative self-rating. So let's say I've identified that. I'm doing a dispute. I'm trying to show the dysfunctionality of those two irrational or unhelpful beliefs that are joined by the word and, right? So it's two beliefs put together. And so an alternative helpful set of beliefs would be, well, I wish that I did perfectly on this. It would be nice. But if I don't, that would not be awful. And I am not a failure as a human. That would be a full rational statement. I wish that, I hope that I do this perfectly. But if I don't, that doesn't make me a failure as a human. Okay? So that would be the full rational belief. And then the last question that someone emailed me was, and I'm going to see if I really understand the question. What happens if the therapist makes a mistake and doesn't show the BC connection? I think I understand what they mean. Remember what we mean by the BC connection. And this is what we want to teach the client, and so that they understand this. Because most people, and in this last lecture that you heard, I called it the erroneous emotional equation. That's when we believe that the activating event or the critical activating event is the direct cause to our emotions and behaviors. So A causes C. That's what clients believe. That's the way we talk. When I say, you made me angry, I'm saying, you, critical A, you're my critical A. What you did or said is my critical A. And that is the cause of my anger. It's not true. Actually, little kids sometimes do it better than we do. They go, he took my ball. He should not have done that. He's no good. So what did they do? They named the situation. They name their demand, their irrational belief, and then they show that is related to what they're upset about. Okay, but often as adults we skip that middle part. We don't take ownership for our beliefs and how those impact our emotions and behaviors. It's much nicer to blame other people and situations for our emotions and behaviors, and they're relevant to them. They're not the direct cause. So what we want to do in therapy, and I think this is so crucial, and it actually helps give clients hope. It also is a burden for them because they have to do some work, but it is very hopeful. If we tell them and we teach them how their beliefs are the direct causes of their emotions and behaviors to a large extent, there is something that they can do about it. We can work to change their beliefs. And in so doing, they can change their emotions and behaviors. They have control over that. That is great news. If A causes C, then it's hopeless. There's nothing we can do. Anytime that we're in a negative situation, we must feel some dysfunctional negative emotion. That's pretty hopeless when you look at it, right? I may give you justification to try to blame our dysfunctional emotions on some situation or person, but it doesn't help you change things. Whereas if you accept the BC connection, that your beliefs actually do matter in terms of the emotion behaviors that you have, then that gives us more hope. So actually, in the very first session, we, with the client, when we educate them about the ABC, we talk about having hope. And hope comes from you having the power to change the way that you view situations, the meanings that you give to it, the evaluations you make of it. And when you do that, that will help you have a much more enjoyable life in the long run, and also help you become more efficient and less dysfunctional and less self-sabotaging in your behaviors. So that's all the questions that I had. It looks like nobody had questions for this week. So what I will do is next week, in my class, there's a new lecture that is posted. And as I said, that is in one of the playlists on the REBT Education and Training Facebook page, and also a YouTube page. The videos are on the YouTube page is a playlist. And so that will be assigned, and I will note on Facebook and in my class through an announcement within Canvas what day and time next week where I will field questions and answer them as best I can. So when you watch that video this weekend or the upcoming week, and any question that comes up about that video, feel free to email me, message me, maybe on Facebook or whatever, and I will do my best to cover that. I thank you guys very much. I know it's a busy time of year, and I really do appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to come and learn some more REBT. I thank you so much, and I want you to have a great rest of the day that you're having. All the best, and bye-bye.